Hello, this is Romania Black, and we're on week 3 of 2023's JanuYaoi! So, last year on week 3, I watched a very bonkers and insane BL called Sex Pistols. And so, after that week, I decided that on the 3rd week of JanuYaoi, it is going to be tradition to watch something that seems really out there and weird and see if I am pleasantly surprised. And so this year, this was actually a little bit harder because it's difficult to find a JanuYaoi series that is both bonkers and also short, or at least short enough for one video, right? And so I had actually had this recommended to me a long time ago by a viewer on YouTube, and I had just kind of filed it away and been like, oh yeah, I'll get to that. And then when I was going through all the options that I could do for this year, I thought that one sounds bizarre, but I'm interested. So, Orenchi no Furo Jijo, or the English translation, Merman in my tub. What a weird concept. There's a mermaid in some guy's tub. That's all I know. But there are 13 episodes of this, and at first I was like, oh, 13 episodes, that's way too much for JanuYaoi. But they're only 4 minutes tops a piece. And that's probably even less than that if you count like OP or EDs or whatever. So at the most, we're looking like at an hour worth of watching. And then after that, we'll have the manga review. Now, the manga review, I was instantly on board. I'm like, let's do this. Orenchi no Furo Jijo, Merman in my tub. I'm going to watch it. Be an hour long. It's kind of like 2 OVAs anyway. Let's do it. How much of the manga is there? 8 volumes. So, did I go out and buy 8 volumes of this manga? Am I going to read it after watching this? I hope it was worth it. But then again, last year I bought 10 volumes of Sex Pistols before even watching that series, and that was money well spent. Thanks, Patreon. So yeah, so patrons, thank you. You've bought me 8 volumes of Merman in my tub. I'm really actually excited about this. It's on Crunchyroll, so it wasn't from a sketch site. Clearly, if Crunchyroll wants to license this, it has to be okay, right? Right? If they took the time to license this, sure. But it came out actually in 2014 is when Crunchyroll got it, so it's been a hot second. So this series is nearly 10 years old, which is fine, but I'm really curious to see what all it's about, what we get with this. Obviously, the animation is only going to be 13 very mini episodes, and there's 8 volumes of content, so there's clearly going to be stuff left out of the anime that is going to be addressed in the manga. So, my plan is to watch these 13 short episodes, and we'll talk about them as we go. And then I'm going to stop the reaction, go back, read all 8 volumes, God help me, and come back and talk to you all about this series. So yeah, that's my plan. So I'm excited though. Maybe this will be very intriguing and cute. It sounds cute. There's a little blonde mermaid in this guy's tub. It seems BL-ish, so why not? So let's find out, shall we? I'm actually really curious to see what all we get with this, and how bonkers are we talking? So we're going to start Orenchi no Furo Jijo, Merman in my tub, episodes 1 through 13. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. You'll notice that I've changed shirts. I just went on a journey the last few days. Reading 8 volumes of Orenchi no Furo Jijo, or Merman in my tub, and that was a trip. I'm kind of floored because I'm not disappointed, but I was expecting like Sex Pistols, Love Pistols levels of bonkers and crazy because it's a merman in a tub, right? Who would have guessed that this ends up being like the most wholesome, happy, heartwarming comedy since Spy Family? Like, what? And that's exactly what it is, because I feel a little disappointed by it being a JanuYaoi entry because it's not really a yaoi at all. at all. This is the most innocent, wholesome, cuddly, heartwarming little series that I've read in a long time. And I was like, there is no, for the record, before we're going to get into major spoilers with this series, just wait till I flip Whiteboard-kun over. We're going to get into major spoilers about basically the whole manga series, the whole 8 volumes, because it is a complete set, right? The 8 volumes. I went out, bought the 8 volumes, watched it, read it, and so there's going to be a lot of spoilers, but I will go say first and foremost, if you are expecting smut or spiciness or anything remotely romantic in this series, this is not the one to watch. I was like, maybe it'll go somewhere, but no, not really. It very much has the Spy Family mentality of there are, as you'll see in a moment, lots of suggestions that are given to the audience that would suggest, and the mangaka is very coy, very, very coy. She is Itokichi is her name. Itokichi is her pen name, and she is very coy about many things. And there's a little bit of give and take and a little bit of misdirect that I want to talk about because this series became fascinating to me. And I started to like cram into the notes and like dive into different webs and threads because I was like, there's something under the surface here, no pun intended, that the mangaka doesn't want to outright say, but will show throughout the story. So I've got lots of notes that I want to talk to you all about volumes 1 through 8. The anime is adorable. I thought that those little episodes were so cute. I went back and looked up the voice actors. Amazing voice cast. The voice cast for this series was fantastic, by the way. So if you were curious, before we dive into the manga and all of its notes that I have on it, because I did like a week-long dive into this series and cracked the code, I think. But let's talk about the anime real quick. Obviously, super cute. The OP gave me a lot of free vibes, and so I was getting my hopes up thinking maybe there'd be a lot of BL elements. We'll talk about that in the manga. But the voice cast for the anime is very, very good. So if you were curious on who the characters voicing these main cast members were, Tatsumi, our main boy here, was voiced by Nobunaga Shimazaki, which is Haru from Free. And I was like, oh, how fitting. The same voice actor that plays a very monotone, seemingly low emotion character under the surface is playing another monotone, seemingly low energy character under the surface. Gotcha. So that was a pretty good casting there. Wakasa is played by Yuichiro Umehara, who I don't really know that well. He plays Renee from Seraph of the End, which was one of the vampires, one of the minor ones. And apparently he's a character in the Tsurune movie that's come out, but it was not a character name I knew. So I was like, okay, well, that's a different character. Okay, cool. But he's in Tsurune in the movie somewhere. Takasa, though, is played by Tatsuhisa Suzuki, who is Makoto from Free. So Makoto and Haru are in this series. They're just not, romantic characters with one another. But he plays the octopus, which is a really fun kind of sassy character for him to play. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of like a cross between Makoto and it seems more Takao from Kuroko's Basketball than it does Makoto. So I kind of like that. Mikuni, though, who is the jellyfish, is actually played by Natsuki Hanai, who plays Haruichi from Ace of the Diamond. And the moment I read that it was Haruichi's voice actor, I'm like, oh, that voice does sound like Haruichi. It has that kind of soft, gentle voice, seemingly. I was like, oh, okay, I get that. Very fun. The only voice actress in this anime that I didn't really know was Ibuki Kido, who plays Kasumi. She's played in several anime, but they are not anime that I've seen. They are probably shoujo, and I've not seen them. So I was a little bit like, there weren't any roles with her character that I was like, oh, I remember that. And then yes, Maki Asuda. Maki Asuda. And I was like, ah! I went back and watched episode 11, the one where the snail Maki appears, and he just has this mumbling voice. It's like ASMR. I just listen to it nonstop. I was like, oh my god, I love this. Suda's voice is like butter. It's like just pure, it's like sex on a stick for me. I'm to just keep talking Suda. And the funny thing is, we'll get to it in the notes, but around the time I think it was volume 8 is when the anime was in full swing of adapting the manga. And the mangaka, it has a little back page where they give they answer questions from fans and things like that, and we'll talk about that. But she makes a little note that she's like, yes, I was listening to Suda in the recording studio, and it's not exactly how I imagined the voice of Maki being, but I was fangirling a little bit. I was like, even the mangaka, grown ass women like me, fangirl over Suda playing this damn snail. I was like, oh my God. His voice, it's like a purr. It's just so amazing. So yeah, we need to talk about this series though, because I went into a dive reading all 8 volumes this last week and trying to break down, because at first when I watched the anime, I was like, this seems like it could be a BL. It's like one step from being a BL. It's like they just need to toe 1 more inch into the water and they will be a BL. And I was like, maybe the manga will do that. And it never really does. However, there are reasons that it doesn't, and I would argue that this is a BL. Even though the mangaka tries to be coy and say that it's not, I think she gives a lot of reasons to why it could be and why it is, just without outright saying it. And you could argue that she does that for a lot of reasons. One, because this is solely and primarily, didn't realize that. Watching the anime, I started to get the hint about it, and I was like, this is a comedy. In the very last volume of the series, Tatsumi says this is not a romance. It's a comedy, first and foremost, which gave me a lot of Spy Family vibes, because I know the fandom is like, oh, well, we want to ship this character and this character in Spy Family, but it's a comedy, so that's not the primary focus, right? There are the elements there where it could be, and I think the mangaka may want it to be eventually at some point, but it's not. And for this series, it is a comedy. There are elements that you can argue lean towards that romance side, but it is primarily a comedy first and foremost. And the second reason is, as what happens with many series that were originally BL, I do think that the mangaka maybe decided to play certain things very subtly and with subtext rather than context because they want a wider audience. And there's other explanations too, which we'll talk about in the manga, but I think that originally maybe there were more BL elements and the mangaka maybe didn't either feel comfortable with them or decided, no, we'll just make this a comedy and not include romance at all, which would include BL. So there's that. But I'll be honest, I took extensive notes and then I broke it down kind of into a few categories, and I'll be honest with you. I think this is a BL, secretly. I think it's a secret BL. It's just, it's hiding it, right? So as you can see, I may have got a little crazy with my notes as we go through it. I actually broke it down. You'll notice it's a big rainbow spectrum here. I broke it down by volumes. So you can see like volumes 1 through 8. You can color code it and kind of see where it goes. But yes, Orenchi no Furo Jijo, or Merman in My Tub by Idokichi. As stated in the final volume, this is not a romance. It's a comedy. But there are many elements. I say it's not a BL, but I have evidence to prove y'all that it could be. And we're going to go through that substantial evidence in the rest of this video. Now, as far as what the anime touches on, I was expecting the anime to maybe cover a lot of the manga, because I was like, okay, well, these anime episodes are vignettes, so maybe the manga itself is vignettes. It is. They're very episodic, and they just deal with little events like all strung together into a volume, which is cute, but there is kind of a thread throughout. So you can't just pick up volume 8 and you meet new characters, and there's a lot of characters that are not in the anime that you meet that if you just picked up like volume 8, you would probably be like, oh, how did we get here? So you do need to read all 8 volumes to get the full effect, but if you miss a volume, you're not totally in the dark, right? But the anime is, ironically and oddly enough, adapted from volumes 1, 2, and 4. Mainly volume 1. Volume 1 is the primary anime, and then there are maybe like 2 or 3 skits from volume 2 and volume 4. There's none from volume 3, oddly enough. But yeah, so the anime is from those 3 volumes, if you're looking for that, to see it in manga form. It's super cute. But I want to talk about, it's not a BL, but... And also, there's a lot of cool gender trope subversions that happen in this manga that I'm actually really excited by and that I like a lot. So I took some extensive notes here to go over through y'all. First, right off the bat, in the very first chapter, when Tatsumi meets Wakasa, he notes that he is handsome. Like, immediately notes he's good looking, and he wants to touch him because he wants to see what a mermaid feels like, if his skin is smooth. And I was like, okay, we're going somewhere with that, right? But then he finds that it's slimy, and Tatsumi actually has like a phobia to slimy things, which is funny. So he doesn't really want anything to do with Wakasa at first. He doesn't want to touch him at all, right? Also funny to note, he touches his tail to confirm that Wakasa's not a cosplayer, which is hilarious. He's like, okay, good, you're not just some creepy guy that I brought into my house. You're a legit merman. So it's great. But there's lots of different characters that show up in this other than the ones we're introduced into the anime. In the first volume of the manga, though, it's Takasu who comes. Tatsumi's favorite food is octopus, so he's kind of like in the back of his head being like, could I cook this guy? And it's kind of funny. There's several moments where Tatsumi's like, if you weren't Wakasa's friend, I might eat you. And it's kind of hilarious. But Wakasa has kind of like a childlike heart, even though he's very much older, and we'll talk about that. And so he's also been very much alone his entire life. And so Tatsumi gives him the rubber duck that's in the anime as a gift. And Wakasa like kind of freaks out because this is his first gift from anyone. And he's like, oh. And so that's why the rubber duck is prevalent throughout most of the anime, because it was a gift from Tatsumi to Wakasa and he treasures it, right? And so Wakasa tells Tatsumi in the first volume he needs to go hang out with his other friends. He's like, you don't have to stay here. Because that was one thing I was wondering in the anime. Tatsumi spends all of his time with Wakasa and his crew. And I'm like, well, does Tatsumi have friends outside? The manga kind of addresses this. The answer is kind of. Tatsumi doesn't really have a lot of friends. He has one, Sosuke, who we meet in the manga. And Sosuke is a treat. He has Sosuke as a friend, but other than that, he doesn't really have any. Like, he's not a shut-in or introverted. He hangs out with kids at school, you find out in the manga, but he doesn't really hang out outside of school with them. He's just kind of like just an average student. He doesn't stand out at all. He has kind of like Kuroko syndrome. And so Wakasa tells him he needs to go hang out with his other friends, and alludes to that Wakasa is the only merman left. It's like, okay. Sosuke, who is his friend from school, is convinced that Tatsumi has a girlfriend, and that's why he's not hanging out. Sosuke's single throughout the whole manga, but he's convinced that Tatsumi has a girlfriend, and he's constantly trying to figure out, like, hey, what's your girlfriend up to? And Tatsumi's like, I don't want you to know about the merman, so let's keep away, shall we? But Sosuke is convinced that the girlfriend is living with him and is constantly jealous of Tatsumi, and Tatsumi just tries not to feed the trolls. Interestingly enough, in the first volume, Tatsumi kind of alludes to the fact that he doesn't really want a lot of people finding out about Wakasa because, one, he's a merman, and he's afraid that people will try to take Wakasa away from him, which is something in itself. But also, he's afraid to tell his family about Wakasa because he, quote-unquote, doesn't think they will understand. And while that is very straightforward, like he doesn't think they'll understand with him being a merman, I thought it could also be alluding to the fact that they wouldn't understand if Tatsumi was in a relationship with a man instead of a woman. So I'm like, you could kind of make a subtle subtext reference that Tatsumi, you could make that little reference that him not wanting the family to know about Wakasa is that he doesn't want them to know he's in a relationship with a male character because of what they might think, because of the prejudice they could have. So I thought that might have been a nice subtle way the mangaka was trying to approach that issue in a straightforward comedy genre. Because then when his sister finds out, he doesn't really care, but it's his older family members he's like, he really doesn't want them to know. So I thought that might have had something to do with it. The age trope difference with BLs is very prevalent in the series because we find out Wakasa may be a century old. He may be like Edward Cullen and be super old. And then we find out Tatsumi is 17. So there is that major age difference, which I think lends to also the mangaka not wanting to make it a straightforward romance because, an 80-year age difference is more than 5. And so maybe they didn't want to go there and make it awkward, but that age difference is established. However, Wakasa is super immature and acts like a child a lot, and Tatsumi kind of has to be the responsible, mature one. So there is kind of a nice little commentary that even if you're a lot older, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a more mature character, as Tatsumi proves time and time again throughout this manga, right? Still though, oh my god, Wakasa wanting to cut himself into sashimi with the leg razor. It's just as funny in the manga as it is in the little anime short, and I love every moment of it. It's hilarious. There is a Christmas episode in a Christmas dinner little vignette in the manga, and all of Wakasa's friends come there, and they kind of like point out that it's like an old man's birthday party. They're like, happy birthday, Christ-san. And it's absolutely hilarious. It's super cute. And also Wakasa still believes in Santa Claus earlier on in the manga, and so Tatsumi takes it upon himself to like go out and get him a stocking. Wakasa says it's a sock at first, which is cute, and then gets him like presents so that he can think that Santa came. And it's really adorable. It's absolutely cute. Wakasa, though, there is a segment here, and that's kind of why I included this on here, that Wakasa, some of the things that are like gender tropes that are kind of subverted, is Wakasa learns everything about humanity from trashy women digest magazines. Like, he learns everything from like the Cosmopolitans of Japan or like the Teen Vogue or something. He learns all of his knowledge of the human world from these trashy women magazines. And he has a lot of trouble in Volume 1 with weight gain, which isn't addressed in the anime at all, but it's actually a kind of running thing that Wakasa, because he's not moving in the tub, he's not getting exercise, and so he's gaining weight. And so he's concerned about his body image. And Tatsumi is like, well, we'll help you get back in shape. But the only thing Tatsumi knows is to give him the equipment that his mother uses to lose weight herself, which ends up not being helpful because it's all like hips and leg equipment, and Wakasa's a merman. So I do think it's funny, though, in this segment that Tatsumi makes the comment, nobody thinks of their mothers as needing to exercise. And it's kind of like, well, no, kind of, that's funny. Only the husbands would think that if they do, right? And so there is an interesting commentary about body image, and it makes more sense as being a cool subversion when we find out later from the mangaka later on in the Q&A sections what she thinks of Wakasa and his gender. So we'll come back to this, but the weight gain thing is something that kind of is a trope that runs along throughout the manga, that Wakasa is constantly trying to keep in shape so that he doesn't get overweight or doesn't get out of shape or lethargic. So Volume 2 has lots of little vignettes I don't have too many notes on. There's a Valentine's Day segment, which you would think would be really romantic, but Kasumi gets involved and she wants to make sweets for Tatsumi, and Wakasa helps her. It's cute. The bubble bath episode is in that one. White Day appears, and for White Day, since Kasumi made them chocolates, Tatsumi and Wakasa both act like butlers for her for the day. It's cute. There's also this girl that lives next door named Kuriyama, and Kuriyama lives next door, and she doesn't really have a relationship with Tatsumi, but she's constantly giving him things, like over and over again. She like makes things and gives to him, and you could argue that she's trying to flirt with him, but Tatsumi's pretty oblivious. He's pretty oblivious to her advances, if they are any. But she like lets them cat sit for her, and there's a cat that kind of frequents the mangas over and over again. And then there's the shark, Agari. I like the shark a lot. I get why they didn't put him in the anime, because his whole deal is that he doesn't talk. Because he can talk, but when he opens his mouth to talk, he's a shark, so like his jaw unhinges and there's all these teeth and he looks terrifying, and his voice comes out as this giant snarl, and everyone is freaked out by him. And so he doesn't want to talk because he doesn't want to scare people. So instead, it's really cute. Him and Tatsumi develop this body language, way of doing sign language with one another, and they do like all these crazy gestures in the manga to communicate. Super cute. It would take a lot of time to animate, and the jokes would take a lot of time to do. And for a 4-minute episode, it would take up a lot of the time. So I get why they don't do that, right? I get why they choose not to. But the first time we meet Agari, though, he like goes to like talk to Tatsumi, and he unhinges his jaw and like makes a slice at Tatsumi, and Tatsumi freaks out and backs up, and it ends up like he ends up biting his belt instead, and it de-pantses Tatsumi. And so, because I guess sharks are scared of stripes or striped items, Agari runs away. And there's a commentary where Wakasa jokes that Tatsumi's, quote, lower half is the hero of the fish community. You make what you will out of that comment. I was like, okay, sure. But we have other little vignettes in here. Mikuni, who is the jellyfish, They mention it in the anime that he has the ability to like split into different versions of himself. He does that in the manga. He splits into like tiny little versions of it. It kind of reminds me of the Angioplasty episode of Doctor Who, where there's all the little white little beings, the aliens, that all like form together in a clump. Kind of reminds me of that episode, but it's really cute. Mikuni is in the manga a lot. But then probably the first, as my dogs want me to play with them, probably the first time we really see Wakasa and Tatsumi have like a bonding moment in the manga is in volume 2, and Wakasa gets sick. And so Tatsumi gets kind of frustrated because Wakasa keeps avoiding him. He won't let him come near him, and he doesn't want him to help him. And Tatsumi's like, he's frustrated. He's like, what's going on? And they have this, it feels like a shoujo romance moment where Tatsumi's like, why can't you depend on me? And he gets really sad. And then he starts to think about it and realizes that Wakasa is used to being alone. And Wakasa is used to handling things by himself without anybody taking care of him. And so Tatsumi's like, okay, that's what it is. He's used to being by himself. He's not used to being taken care of. I'm going to need some backup with this because it's going to take a lot, not just myself, to help make him feel better. So he gets his sister to come and get involved, and they both end up nursing him back to health. But it's a really sweet, sweet moment. And it's the first time we see Tatsumi like really connect with Wakasa and try to get to know him better. So I was like, okay, we're developing that relationship just a wee bit. All right. Sosuke invites Tatsumi to a summer festival along with Kasumi, and Wakasa has to stay at home in the tub. And you would think that he would be really sad and lonely because Tatsumi leaves him. But we come to find out that all of the other characters throughout the day while Tatsumi's gone to school end up visiting him, and so he's not lonely. He gets to interact with all of them. But anyway, we find out that during this time, Wakasa is worried about getting out of shape again, and he basically tries to convince Tatsumi to take him back somewhere where he can exercise. And Takusa, the octopus, says, oh, I know a place where you can go. It's not the river, because Wakasa doesn't want to go back to the river. We find out Wakasa tried to get out of the river at first because other people were trying to like capture him because he was like the half fish, half man, and they wanted to capture him, and he didn't like that. And so Takusa's like, oh, I know a place we can take him to that's more secret that he won't know. And it turns out to be the school swimming pool. It's a very free-like moment, especially if you think of Makoto's voice actor voicing the octopus, taking them to a swimming pool. But Tatsumi gets kind of sad in this moment because he thinks that Wakasa might be better suited for a bigger area to swim in than his tub, but Wakasa convinces him that he likes being in the tub best. Which could allude to, you know, he likes being in the tub best, he likes being with you the best, Tatsumi, could allude to that. There's also a brief moment where Wakasa like jumps out of the water, does like the Little Mermaid thing, and Tatsumi gets kind of distracted for a moment thinking that what if Wakasa was a girl? And he's like, well, what if he was a girl? But then he backtracks and thinks, nah, I think I like the way Wakasa is now. Again, could be alluding to something that he likes Wakasa the way he is now, wouldn't want him to be a girl. We'll just leave that for now. We'll just put a pin in that, leave it for now, because there's going to be some other stuff that comes up as well. Volume 3 happens, and lots of little vignettes occur in this. But Kuriyama, who is Tatsumi's female neighbor, she makes some sweets for him. She has a bunch of extra sweets. She apparently likes to bake, and she makes a lot of extra sweets for him and he takes it home. And Wakasa kind of teases Tatsumi. He's like, hey, she made you all these sweets. You should make her something back. You should be nice. Like, what's cool about this series is that Tatsumi interacts with a lot of characters, and Wakasa is never jealous of Tatsumi interacting with them and I think that's nice, because had this been a romance series, I think it would have been all too easy to make Wakasa be the jealous other character in the duo. But he's not. He teases Tatsumi that he doesn't do enough for Kuriyama, for the girl character. He's like, you should make her sweets in return. Come on, be a nice guy. And Tatsumi's like, I guess. Tatsumi's very monotone and low energy on the surface, which is really funny. But he ends up convincing Tatsumi to make sweets for her. And at the end of the chapter, Tatsumi, she kind of jokes, and she's like, if you keep this up, I'm just going to have to marry you. And on the surface, you're like, okay, well, the mangaka, maybe they are trying to say that Tatsumi should like girls and that this shouldn't be a BL. Okay, fine. That's what we're going with. Sure. The very next chapter, the very next chapter, after we had Tatsumi making her sweets, the chapter that immediately follows, Tatsumi's first lines are, "I need to touch Wakasa." I'm like, why? There with that. So, in the very next chapter, Tatsumi says he needs to touch Wakasa to quote-unquote get over his fear of slimy things. All right. So that's what he's like, fine. He needs to get over his fear of slimy things, which could you allude to be him getting over his fear of liking men? We don't know. It's not directly stated. But he ends up trying multiple times, doesn't work. So in the end, his solution, Tatsumi's, is to give Wakasa shoulder massage coupons to use, because that won't be weird. Just like, I was like, okay, mangaka, you say one thing, and in the following chapter you do something to completely contradict that message. Fine. Be that way. So we have other little vignettes that happen. Kasumi misunderstands a horoscope. I feel like Kasumi and Midorima from Kuroko's no Basketball would get along very, very well. She thinks that she needs to, it's a really cute miscommunication. She thinks she needs to spend time with a merman, but the horoscope was saying her man, so it was really cute. We find out that Kasumi is an Aries, and of course Wakasa is a Pisces, because why not? And then there is a really nice little vignette where Tatsumi gets caught in the rain and he ends up going to his friend Sosuke's house. It's really cute, and Sosuke turns out to be loaded. He's rich, and his father really likes baths, so there's this huge bath and everything. And it's a really cool message at the end of the chapter, because Tatsumi sees this really nice bath, this really nice house, and all the things that Sosuke has, and he kind of runs through his head like, do I envy this? But in the end, when he goes home and he sees Wakasa and all of the other friends there, he realizes, yeah, that nice bath is cool and everything, but I have the most unique bath, and I like this more. And it's like, it just coddles your heart. You're like, just so sweet, right? So we've met Agari the shark. The next one we meet in volume 3 is a starfish named Goromaru, who I think is the youngest. Goromaru, or is competing as the youngest with another character that we'll meet later on. And he shows up, and at first Tatsumi doesn't care. He's like, oh cool, a starfish, nice. He can multitask, he can move around the house, doesn't necessarily need water all the time. It's great. But he ends up finding out that Goromaru has a crush on Kasumi, who is his sister, and he's like, And he doesn't get to be the jealous or protective older brother, but he definitely is kind of like, Goromaru, that's not going to work, because we find out Kasumi, his sister, does not like aggressive types at all. At one point, she gets kabadons 6 times, and she's like, nope, not having it. And so Wakasa, he asks Wakasa if he's lonely, and Wakasa's like, no, I have all you guys here. Are you lonely, Tatsumi? And Tatsumi, this is during New Year's in the manga, says, no, it's almost too noisy now, because they have all these friends hanging out. Super cute. We find out that Tatsumi is 17 years old in the New Year's chapter. And I just put this one right here. The New Year's sushi roll contest. Again, there is occasionally some suggestive imagery in this manga series. It's not completely tame. There's a few times where they go to the beach and they sand sculpt. They like to sand sculpt breasts onto Wakasa, almost like they're teasing Tatsumi that Wakasa's a guy, a merman instead of a mermaid. But there's a New Year's sushi roll contest, which I've never seen done in any other anime or manga. So I'm wondering if the mangaka just made it up for this scene, for this imagery. But in the imagery, they have to try to eat an entire sushi roll without it being cut. It's just a whole long sushi roll. And you can see the gesture I'm making with my hand with this, where this is going. Because, and I'll show you a picture from the manga. Tatsumi tries to eat the whole sushi roll on his own and ends up choking on it and has to get the Heimlich maneuver. You can guess, all the characters with sushi rolls in their mouths, what that looks like. Could have chose any New Year's game. Any at all. That's the one they picked. Again, not suggestive at all, right? Not suggestive at all. So, like I said, Goromaru has a crush on Kasumi. Wakasa says that in a shoujo manga, he looks at Tatsumi and says, in a shoujo manga, this would be the time that the big brother or the male hero would come in to save the princess from the character she doesn't like. But Tatsumi says he's not that type of hero. He's not the type of hero that saves the girl. And I'm like, But we're going to put a pin on that, right? We're going to put a pin on that to the last volume. Come back to that. This is volume 3, remember? We're going to come back to that pin, that he's not the type that saves the girl. All right? So we'll come back to that. But yeah, Tatsumi in the very next chapter has a dream, though. A dream where he's faced with different versions, with 2 versions of each of the characters that are in the tub. Like 2 versions of Takusa, 2 versions of Maki. And he has to choose which version is the real version, right? Which version is the version he wants to be with. They phrase it both ways. They're like, which version is real to you? Which version do you want to be with? And for the most part, all the characters are all the same. It's just like they're doppelgangers. But when he gets to Wakasa, there's a female version of Wakasa and a male version of Wakasa. And Tatsumi has to choose which version he wants. And we aren't shown which one he picks. He wakes up. But then Wakasa asks him later, he's like, when he's telling him about the dream, he's like, oh, well, which version did you pick? And Tatsumi says, I picked the male version, but I'm not sure if it's the right answer. So again, I feel like the mangaka has many opportunities where they could place Tatsumi with the female character or having him choose the female version, but he doesn't. And he doesn't seem to understand why, and we'll talk about that in later volumes. He doesn't seem to understand why he keeps choosing the male version, but he does. And he just says, I don't know what the right answer is. This is what I picked, right? We'll talk about that more. There's other things. There's one part in volume 3 where a robber actually sneaks into the house, and I was a little freaked out by this chapter because a robber sneaks in and Tatsumi actually shows up while he's still there, and he has to like luckily Tatsumi has practiced judo and ends up like pinning him to the ground and getting him to leave. And the robber does see Wakasa as he leaves, but when he tells the cops, they don't believe him. But it's fascinating, right? So there is this vase scene, the last part of volume 3. This is probably my favorite story, one of my favorite stories in the whole series. If you get volume 3, this story is so good, and I love it so much. In this story, Tatsumi is showing Wakasa a special vase. We come to find out the apartment that they're living in was his grandfather's. He's living with his grandfather because it's closer to his school, and that's why he's living away from his parents. It's like, okay, he's living there so he can go. It's kind of like it's kind of like Haru's deal in Free. He's staying in this house because it's close to his high school, but his parents don't live there anymore. It's kind of the same deal. So Tatsumi shows this special vase that his grandfather had, and Wakasa accidentally drops the vase and breaks it. And Tatsumi, for the most part in this manga, has been pretty emotionless. He's just kind of gone with the flow with everything. This is the first time we legit see Tatsumi mad. And he gets mad because he tells Wakasa he's insecure about forgetting about his grandfather. He feels like the memories of his grandfather has faded, and this vase was one of the only things he had left to remember his grandfather by, and now it's broken. And Wakasa, because he's been alone all this time in his life, he doesn't quite understand. And so he just doesn't get why it's such a big deal. And Tatsumi kind of claims that Wakasa is being insensitive, and he just leaves. He goes home to his parents. He's like, I don't want to be here anymore. And he just gets mad and leaves. And Wakasa is just left in the tub. And so Wakasa, he laments to Agari, the shark that comes over, saying he doesn't understand. And Agari is like, well, maybe you guys just need to kiss and make up. And Wakasa's like, that's not going to work. And it's like, well, you put it out there, Agari. And he kind of, in his own way of communicating, makes Wakasa see that because they're fighting, it means that they are actually close. That if Tatsumi didn't care about Wakasa and didn't care about the vase, he wouldn't be making such a big deal out of it. Meanwhile, his parents are kind of like, why are you so upset, Tatsumi? And Kasumi doesn't say that Tatsumi's living with a merman, but she does hint that he has a friend that he's fighting with. And the mom actually does this really cool thing where she's like, hey, that vase you got from your grandfather, you broke it when you were a kid when you first got it. And Tatsumi's like, what? She's like, yeah, you broke it and your grandfather put it back together. She's like, it's already been broken once before, but you glued it back together. And Tatsumi, realizing this, is like, oh crap, I got so mad at at Wakasa for no reason. So he goes back and finds that Wakasa had tried to glue the vase back the same way that he did. And they end up making up. They don't kiss, but they end up making up, and instead their version of kissing is they take a bath together. That's like literally in this manga, whenever they take a bath together, that's like their version of romance. It's actually really endearing. So volume 4 is the last one that has anything from the actual anime. The extras that Tatsumi is able to buy from a salary raise, that's included in here. There's lots of little extras in volume 4. It's probably the volume I have the least notes about. Wakasa refers himself to a princess throughout a lot of these stories. Again, we're going to touch back on that with some of the mangaka comments, but in literally every story that he acts out, he's the female character. Wakasa is. He's the princess in all of the scenarios. We also meet Tatsumi's uncle, who is like, what if Kaji from Neon Genesis was really weird and had no luck with the ladies? That's literally what he looks like. He looks like Kaji from Neon Genesis. He looks like Tatsumi, but his hair is all crazy. I'm not sure if he's a scientist or if he's just a disheveled cop. I don't know. I guess he's a scientist because he keeps making all these bath salts that he wants Tatsumi to test out for him and thinks that he's trying to create like a love potion or something, and it never works out right? And so his uncle gives him this new potion to try out, but instead of like, it's supposed to rejuvenate Wakasa's skin, but instead of doing that, it makes him act like a baby. It like reverts him back to a childlike state, and Tatsumi has to take care of him until it wears off. Hilarity ensues. But then in volume 4, there's lots of pop culture references throughout this. They do a karaoke session, the whole group. Maki, I made note of this because Maki the Snail, who again is played by Suda, sings his song for karaoke was You Give Love a Bad Name by Bon Jovi. I want Suda to karaoke this now. I want him to sing Bon Jovi so bad. Do this, Suda. I need to hear this. And we find out that Minuki has a sweet voice, the jellyfish, which having Haruichi's voice actor, I could see that. Wakasa sings My Chemical Romance's Drowning Lessons, which is such a weird choice for a song. I was like, really? Okay, maybe that's why they couldn't adapt it, because it had copyrighted songs in it. But we come to find out that Wakasa's worried that Tatsumi will be affected by his singing. He's not. And we come to find out that because mermaids are sirens, so are mermen, but only women are affected by Wakasa's singing. So there's like women in the house next door that are like on the ground writhing from his singing, but Tatsumi's not affected at all. So I wanted to include that because it's a nice little thing. Like in a lot of BL, there's the trope that the couple that are meant to be, they're not affected by the wiles of the other one. Like one of the couples in a BL series might be a playboy and all the other girls or other guy characters are like swooning over them, but the one they're meant to be with isn't affected because it's beyond just physical lust. It's a love that lasts the ages. That's kind of the moment I feel like with Tatsumi. Tatsumi's not affected by Wakasa's singing because their relationship goes beyond just the physical lust and all of that. It's a fun time. But yeah, so in one of the next skits, Wakasa loses his voice. That was really cute. But in the one right after it, Wakasa decides that he wants to try to get an outside pool. And so he convinces Tatsumi to convert like their grill or something into an outside pool for him to sit in. And Tatsumi doesn't understand why he wants to do this. But he does it anyway. He converts basically it into a hot tub outside. And so we find out that Tatsumi wanted to stargaze with Tatsumi, that Wakasa wanted to stargaze with Tatsumi. He had read in a magazine there was going to be like a meteor shower and he wanted to like see the constellations and stuff during it. So again, there's this really, really cute scene where they're out stargazing, two totally cool bros just sitting in a tub stargazing, nothing between them. But during this, Wakasa compares them to Orihime and her lover, who are like the couple that are star-crossed lovers that end up becoming constellations in the sky, and they can only see each other like once a year. And he says that he would be the Princess Orihime and Tatsumi would be the prince. But no romance at all. Nothing at all. None whatsoever, right? Nope. In one of the next skits, Hisatora, who we find out is the name of Tatsumi's uncle, Hisatora, and he is his father's younger brother. He makes a potion, a bath salt that he wants Wakasa to try out that's supposed to that men are supposed to be able to use. Like usually the bath salts are for women. Again, he thinks Tatsumi, like Sosuke does, is dating a girl. So all the bath salts have been for girls. But he's like, this one's for you, Tatsumi. Tatsumi doesn't trust his uncle at all. So he gives it to Wakasa to try. And Wakasa tries it and it makes him very manly. Like he becomes this instant, brooding, very dominant male character of a merman. And Hisatora shows up and ends up seeing Wakasa, and like Kasumi, has a reaction of being like, oh, your roommate's a guy, not a girl. But he seems okay with the fact that Wakasa is a merman and tries to tell Tatsumi that he could probably, like get him out of there if he really wants to. But Tatsumi doesn't want to be alone without Wakasa. And so by the end of their session together and their visit, his uncle ends up leaving him and tells us, the audience, he's like, I'm glad that I visited Tatsumi because it turns out, I guess, my nephew doesn't need to be alone. And he doesn't need to be with a woman for a while. He's fine right now. So whatever that's supposed to mean, right? He doesn't need a woman for a while. He's got Wakasa. And then he wakes up the next day and he was drunk, apparently. We find out, and doesn't remember anything. So he doesn't remember Wakasa at all. So it's like, problems solved. So then we have Volume 5. We're past the halfway point. Volume 5, the whole volume was previewed at the end of Volume 4 as being like, this is a volume where we find out how Tatsumi and Wakasa secretly met in the past. And it's like, it gives very Spirited Away vibes, like, oh, Chihiro has met hockey in the past, so it's cool. But we come to find out that Wakasa has this very romanticized version of how Tatsumi met him. He says it's to the tune of Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were, which I was thinking of the whole time reading. It's hilarious. And he's like, oh yes, me and Tatsumi met as children. I imparted life lessons to him. It has to do with his grandfather. If you get a chance to get Volume 5, it's worth the read. It's hilarious because he goes through this whole elaborate backstory and then Tatsumi completely unravels it. He's like, well, wait, this is my grandpa's house, not out in the woods. We didn't meet at the river. I was fishing outside of school and I caught something in my hook and it was you. It's like, it completely subverts the whole thing. It's great. But there's lots of little moments throughout that segment that I won't spoil. And we do get to see Tatsumi's parents. His dad is really hot, which is great. But it's really cute. And it does kind of talk about how Tatsumi was afraid of becoming a big brother and was afraid that his sister would steal all of his family's attention. And Wakasa kind of gives him the advice being like, well, your parents are going to pay attention to her as well as you now, but you're her only brother. So that is something that only you will have with her, right? You're his one and only brother and she's your one and only sister. So it's really sweet. It's a sweet little vignette and it's really cute and it's hilarious. Volume 5 has a lot of great moments in it. The next one is that there is a summer festival again. So we kind of get a little bit of a passage of time, like we established that a whole year has passed since he's known Wakasa. And so we're back to a summer festival. And Wakasa's feeling very romantic, thinking about Orihime and the star-studded pair. That's like his favorite story he tells throughout the manga. And he tells Tatsumi he should be more romantic himself. He's like, you should be more romantic. Why don't you get a girlfriend? Go on. And Tatsumi's like, I don't want a girlfriend. And he lists off all these reasons of why he shouldn't have a girlfriend. He's like, I would have to work more hours to make money to go on dates. I wouldn't be able to spend time with you as much. And it's like, oh, and he's like, and you'd have to be here by yourself. And then Wakasa's like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't get a girlfriend then. So for the summer festival, they all make little notes on pieces of paper of what they want to wish for the following year. That's kind of like the thing of the summer festival. They want to wish for something, they tie it to a tree, and hopefully it will come true. So at first, Wakasa tells him to write about getting a girlfriend, but then he takes it away and he's like, no, don't do that. And then all the friends come over and they all make wishes to put on the tree. Goromaru wants to be a good husband for Kasumi, and Tatsumi's like, don't make that wish. So instead he makes a wish to become taller. And then Takasu wants to get a tool set so he can help fix up Tatsumi's house so that he'll praise him. Maki wants to grow better as a person as well as his body, which is hilarious. Mikuni wants to grow another 10 centimeters taller. Agari wants to learn to talk better this year. And then we get to Wakasa, who of course has the heartwarming wish that he wants them all to stay together forever. And it's like, all right, be all sentimental. And so the very next chapter after this big thing about them all staying together forever is that Sosuke shows up, his friend from high school, and wants help to get help on homework. And he's also wanting to pry and see Tatsumi's girlfriend that he's been keeping secret. Tatsumi, of course, through the hilarity of the chapter, has to try to keep Sosuke away from the bathroom, keep Wakasa quiet so they don't run into each other so that he can't know that he has a merman in his tub. It ends up working out, but at the very end of the chapter, Sosuke's like, well, here, I meant to bring this watermelon for you to split with your girlfriend. I guess I'll give it to you and you can just split it with her whenever. And the chapter ends with Wakasa getting approached by Tatsumi in the tub saying, hey, girlfriend, want to split this watermelon? And it's great. I was just like, it's wonderful. It's super cute. I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's do this. And even though it's meant for a joke, I'm like, mangaka, you know what you're doing. You wrote this. So the following chapter, in this, we start to see Tatsumi and Wakasa's relationship slowly develop more and more as the series goes on, which is really super cute. But around this time, Wakasa has been reading in a magazine that he wants a cell phone. Tatsumi's like, why do you need a cell phone? And he's like, so I can talk to you whenever. And at first, Tatsumi kind of likes the idea. He gets him like a walkie-talkie, a receiver, like a transmitter, so he can like talk to him in the other room. And at first, Tatsumi likes it because he's like, oh, I don't have to sit in the bathroom floor anymore. I can just hang out in my comfy room and talk to Wakasa whenever I want. But later, Wakasa realizes that just talking to him on the phone isn't good enough. He wants to be able to see Tatsumi and be with him face to face. And it's super sweet. He like ends up like getting out of the tub and trying to find Tatsumi, and they have to like end up taking him back to the tub. It's super sweet. Maki loses his hermit crab shell, and gets a new one. That chapter's great. Tatsumi gets sick himself this time around, and the others try to nurse him back to health, which backfires, and he ends up having to take care of all of them. And then Wakasa, he complains that he wants to like stretch himself out in the tub, but the tub's not big enough. So Tatsumi has this cool idea that I'm just going to stretch a hammock over the tub so you can stretch out while still getting wet so you don't dry yourself out. It backfires horribly and he ends up getting tangled in the net, which fisherman jokes ensue. And then comes Echizen. Echizen is a crab, a very handsome, proud crab, who seems to like Wakasa and has known him for a very long time. And he does not like Tatsumi because he believes Tatsumi is a human and should not be interacting with them. And he decides that he wants to try to convince Wakasa to leave. And so we have our first little bout of drama enter the series where Echizen is like, because for the most part, like Agari and Goromaru and Takusa and Mikuni and Maki, they're all totally fine that Wakasa and Tatsumi are friends. Echizen is like, no, this is a human. He doesn't need to be with you. You need to go back home and be with your own kind and be with all of us in the ocean, in the river. And it's the first little bout of drama that sneaks in. It's like, okay, all right, what are we going to do with this? But Tatsumi ends up helping Echizen at some point. I'm going to tell you how. You need to read volume 5 to find out. But I would definitely recommend getting volume 5. That's one of my favorite volumes. It's really, really good. But he ends up helping him out, and Echizen kind of like laments going, okay, fine. I'll concede that you're okay. He's a major diva. Echizen is such a diva. He has like the very distinct pose. He's very over the top. I could just picture J. Michael Tatum voicing him. Such a diva. And he's just like, fine, I guess you can stay here for now, since Tatsumi is not like other humans that we've met in the past. And it's like, okay. So Tatsumi, we see him in Wakasa's schedule and what they do every day. It's really cute. But at the end of the volume, the mangaka talks about, the mangaka has asked 2 questions, right? The mangaka has asked 2 questions in the Q&A section that I made note of. One was that somebody asked why there wasn't more female characters in the series, why there weren't female fish. And the mangaka kind of skirts around it and says, well, you know, if this were like an all-boys school, it'd be all boys interacting with each other. That's kind of how Wakasa's situation is. And I like Kasumi being the only girl. She's like, it's kind of fun that she's the only girl in this sea of male characters, so to speak. So it's kind of cute. But then the other question she gets is, does Tatsumi really want a girlfriend? And her reply is, and I quote, of course. After seeing the chests of men all the time, he wants the healing power of a female. And at that point, I was getting a little discouraged because I was like, this is not a BL, is it? It's just going to be like a big tease, isn't it? And the very next volume, after she told us she wasn't going to introduce a female character, what do we get? We get a female character. But not in the way that you would think. Not in the way you think. And she handles it really interestingly. So volume 6, Wakasa finds out that there's a spirit in the water heater it's bizarre, but they both like talk up Tatsumi in this. And Wakasa admits that he loves being with him. So there's that. Tatsumi's uncle gives him a truth serum bath salt, which I was really like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And it ends up getting in the bath with Echizen and Takasa, the octopus. And we come to find out that those two, the crab and the octopus, were childhood friends that slowly grew apart. And they act like they hate each other, but they might actually like each other and be in a relationship. And I was like, okay, well, at least we're getting possibly one BL out of this with Echizen and Takasa, that they're like they have the childhood friends trope. So at least we're getting that. And then we have a Christmas chapter I want to talk about that real quick with y'all. In the Christmas chapter, Kasumi tries to tell everybody that Santa Claus isn't real. And Wakasa has like a high-speed come apart. And Tatsumi has to play damage control. And they try to convince Kasumi that Santa does exist. And it does kind of work for the most part. But there's this really cool line that Wakasa says. Because Wakasa toes on the line as a character of being super mature, but also having like a childlike heart. But then at one point, they tell like us, the audience, they're like watching over Kasumi, and Tatsumi's getting all the gifts ready. And Wakasa's just sitting there watching her. And she kind of in her sleep is sleep talking. And she's like, where's Tatsumi and Wakasa's gifts? Because they're adults. And Wakasa says, for adults, things that don't have shapes become our presents. And I was like, oh, he's like, I want to keep these feelings of yours. And it's so sweet because, yeah, as an adult, I'm like, yeah, the older you get, the less physical presence you want, the more like being with people and the camaraderie, that's more of the gift. And it's like, it's so darn sweet. I'm like, oh, it just absolutely, that line, adults, things that don't have shapes become our presents. I was like, oh, that line is so good. I just want to bottle it up. I love it so, so much. It's just a really sweet chapter. And then we follow it up with Sosuke, his classmate, worrying that Tatsumi find out works at a liquor store. He's underage, but he works at a liquor store because he somehow conveniently wrangled himself into it. Sosuke's afraid that Tatsumi is drinking because he's seen him buy some liquor at a store, and come to find out he's using it to like cook meat with. It's very, very innocent. The cat shows up again. And then we have Makara. Now on the cover, Makara is a female. And I was like, mangaka, you just said you weren't introducing female characters. And then you do this. You say one thing and then you contradict yourself right afterwards, right? But when Makara shows up in the chapter, Makara's a male. And I was like, what is this? And we come to find out Makara is a clownfish. And as it's established in the manga, clownfish, depending on their environment, can change gender. I was like, oh. So the gag is that whenever Makara is around Tatsumi, Makara becomes a woman. And whenever Makara is around Kasumi, Makara becomes a man. So it's interesting that Makara kind of transitions back and forth throughout the manga. But the second time that Makara appears, Wakasa explains that eventually Makara's gender will eventually solidify and be one or the other. It just hasn't made that decision yet. They haven't decided what they want to be. And so Makara says that she wants to be a woman because she loves Tatsumi. And there's this moment where you're like, okay, if Makara stays a woman, is Tatsumi gonna like... Because the whole joke, the last 5 volumes, has been that Tatsumi wishes, like he's like, man, if Wakasa was a woman, but he's not. And so when Makara becomes a woman, I want to go back to this whole thing about not a hero that saves the girl. We'll touch upon this here and then again later. But Makara's like, I want to be a woman. Is that something you would like, Tatsumi? And we, the audience, are going, well, is he going to be okay with this? Is this what he's wanted the whole time? And Tatsumi says, it's okay if you want to be an adult woman, but I'm still a kid. And I don't know what love is. And it's not a question I can answer easily. I need more time to figure things out. Which seems like the crux of this whole series, that Tatsumi hasn't decided if he likes men or women. It's just he's still figuring things out. And he's young. He doesn't know all the answers yet. He's still just figuring stuff out. And I'm like, okay. All right, mangaka, if that is your way of telling us, the audience, that this is not a romance, but we're not ruling it out. We're just saying he's not sure. I'm like, okay, I can work with that. So at the end of volume 6, the mangaka talks about the dubbing of the anime and then a drama CD, which sounds a lot of fun, that they were fangirling over Suda, and acknowledges that Echisan and Takusa may have been childhood friends and in a relationship. And according to the mangaka, I wanted to come back to this. Wakasa, according to the mangaka, has a man's heart and soul, but likes really cute things and is influenced by women's magazines. And I really like that. I really like that because I think it's all too easy that there's an all too easy BL trope of one of the couples being like more feminine and that situation. And the mangaka kind of dispels that instantly. They're like, no, Wakasa is a man. He is male. His soul is a man, just like his body. But he likes cute things and likes magazines targeted for women. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm like, yes, good. Good on you, mangaka. Way to go. So I really like volume 6 in terms of the themes that it presents. It outlines those for us as the audience, and it's very, very effective. I liked it a lot. Volume 7, we're getting near the end. Volume 7 is a very weird volume. And mainly because Wakasa has mating season. It's weird. Yeah, Wakasa goes into a mating season, and we just got done in volume 6. I think it's very noteworthy and intentional by the mangaka. We just a few chapters ago talked about how Tatsumi said that they were not ready to know what love was. They're still a kid figuring things out. And immediately afterwards, in the next volume, we go into like Wakasa having its mating season. And for a split second, it's a little bothersome because Tatsumi is afraid that Wakasa is going to try to get with Makara, who's a woman. And the other fish kind of established, they're like, oh yeah, the last time Wakasa was in heat in mating season was a century ago. So establishing Wakasa's at least 100 years old. And there were no female mer people around back then, so he didn't have to worry about anything. And so Tatsumi's kind of like, well, do you want to get with Makara? Makara, are you all right with this? And Makara's kind of like down for whatever. She's like, fine, I guess. But then Wakasa says, I don't want to do anything with Makara except hold her hand. He's like, all I really know about love is that I want to hold your hand, and that's it for now. I'm pretty oblivious about everything else. So Wakasa's kind of in the same boat as Tatsumi. He's like, I don't really know what love is. I wasn't around anybody the last time this came up, so can we just hold hands? And then the chapter ends with Wakasa holding Kasumi's hand and holding Makara's hand, and Makara's holding Tatsumi's hand, and then Kasumi's holding Tatsumi's hand. They just form like a little square. It's really cute. But yeah, that's all we do with it. Nothing. It's very, very innocent for what it could be, right? There's a Freaky Friday chapter where Wakasa and Tatsumi switch places, and they both realize that they don't have it as easy as they thought. It is really cute, though. There's a hilarious moment where as soon as Wakasa switches body with Tatsumi, Tatsumi's like, can you walk out of here? And he's just like scooting across the floor. It's really cute. It's funny. Wakasa admits that he's not interested in marriage. He's not interested in marriage at all. He doesn't want to be married. After him and Kasumi gush over a TV series proposal, he's like, well, that's cute, but I don't want to get married. So it's like, okay. And then we have like, the last 2 volumes do amp the drama up a wee bit. There is a lot of drama where this scientist shows up, and we find out that this whole time in the manga series, Tatsumi's done a really good job of keeping Wakasa a secret. And the scientist shows up at Tatsumi's door being like, I saw you carry that merman to your house, and I want that merman. Like, I'm in love with it. I want to take it home with me. I want to keep it in my own tank. I can give it a better home than you can. And starts threatening Tatsumi. And it actually gets to be a little bit tense because Tatsumi's like, no, I don't want you to take Wakasa away. And he like has this like memory removal serum that he's like, well, I'll give this to Wakasa and he'll forget about you. And for a split second, it's really concerning. I'm like, are we doing this? Are we going to have Wakasa forget about Tatsumi? What's going to happen? And Tatsumi gets like knocked out by the scientist, so he can't do anything. And in this like Unico moment, Wakasa becomes this giant merman. He's like, don't threaten Tatsumi or I may hurt you. And the assistant that comes with the scientist, she shows up with him. She finally realizes, oh, we don't need to anger this merman. And she ends up knocking out the scientist, giving him the memory serum so he'll forget about Wakasa. And she takes him away and she's like, I'll leave you guys to it. You guys deserve to be together. So she's like the third wheel that comes in to get our BL couple together, right? It's crazy, but yeah, she's like, they can still be together, right? It's insane. And then the very following chapter, we do a Little Mermaid parody. We do a Little Mermaid parody where Tatsumi is Eric and Wakasa is Ariel. And then Maki is Sebastian. Ecchi's in his Triton, of course. And it's really, really cute. Kasumi plays Vanessa, who is what Ursula turns into, and Ursula is played by Takasa. It's absolutely adorable. And at the end of it, though, it's a little variation. It's not Disney Little Mermaid. It's a little bit more like Hans Christian Andersen Little Mermaid. At the very end, Wakasa has to make a choice whether they kill the prince to stay a human or go back into the sea and be a merman. And he chooses to go back into the sea and be a merman. But Tatsumi in the end says, well, you don't have to be alone. And at the very end of the story, they're offered to stay in the tub together. And there's a statement at the very end of it that I think is really, really important to this whole story. Again, going back to the idea of them being a couple and being a BL in a society that won't necessarily recognize them. And it's at the very end, Wakasa says, well, even though we can't be married, we can still be together. And I'm like, okay, series. Okay, non-BL series, making a statement that even though we can't be recognized as being together marriage-wise or legally, we can still be together in this series. Not a romance. And so, yeah, there's a few more skits in Volume 7. For some reason, Sosuke's on the back cover. He's been on the back cover for several volumes. Sosuke just has like a little page to himself at the very back, and it's always been cutesy. But for some reason, the mangaka's like, oh, hey, here's Sosuke in a very risque position on the back cover for reasons. We don't know why. I was like, and she makes a comment earlier on in the Q&As that she doesn't have a lot of romance in this series because it's for kids. But then she has an image like that, mangaka. She's very contradictory in a lot of her statements in the Q&A, which is kind of funny because I've heard like other mangaka like Fujimoto is the same way. So I'm like, or Ano's the same way. So you can't really trust the interviews for being totally accurate. I'm like, fine. But then we get Volume 8, the final volume, y'all. And the very first chapter has like all of the sea creatures asking Tatsumi who deserves to be in the tub the most. And at the very end, Tatsumi says he likes Wakasa the most, so he needs to stay in the tub. Now afterwards he says it's because Wakasa doesn't move around and mess with stuff, but still, he picked Takasa. So they reach their 100th chapter. There's over 100 chapters in this manga series. They reach their 100th chapter. They do a mini recap where Tatsumi says this isn't a romance, it's a comedy. They do all that. Tatsumi establishes in this volume that he's not a kid anymore, unlike Volume 6. He's not a kid anymore. There's a weird hot tub time machine chapter where Wakasa and Tatsumi, they go into the past, and there's this big controversy where some townspeople are trying to like capture a mermaid. And Wakasa says because there aren't many of them left, they need to save the mermaid. And it's established that possibly mermaids are immortal, and so that's why they're so old. And Wakasa convinces the mermaid that not all of humanity is bad. And he even offers Tatsumi, he's like, if you eat some of my tail, you'll live forever. If you want, you can have some. And Tatsumi turns it down because he says, quote, I don't eat my friends. Which is funny, but it's a really cute chapter. It's very bizarre where they do the time machine chapter, but it's really cute. I liked it. Kasumi finally meets all of the crew, as of up until Volume 8, she'd only met Goromaru and Wakasa, but she meets all the others in the final volume. She's a little overwhelmed at first, but Goromaru does this really cute thing where he protects her, and she's kind of thankful to him. It's really sweet. But then we have the final arc of the whole series. It's like a big set of chapters that are all like two-parters. And Tatsumi goes on the school trip again, but he's gone for several days, and he tells Wakasa that. He's like, I'm going to be gone for like 5 days and 4 nights, so I've saved you all this food. You'll be fine. But Wakasa's like, I don't want to be alone that long. So he sneaks off and gets into the ocean somehow. I guess their town's near the ocean, and manages to go and find out where Tatsumi is vacationing at with his class, where they're on their class field trip to, and hangs out with them, and all the other sea creatures come too, and they all hang out together. And we meet Awara, who is a squid, And Awara is Wakasa's teacher. He's a squid that's been around for longer than Wakasa has. And Awara makes the comment being like, I don't know if you can be with Tatsumi forever. Don't know if it's going to work. He's like, I think Tatsumi will abandon you. And Wakasa's like, no, that's not going to happen. No. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Tatsumi's classmates are questioning, like, what are you going to do after high school? Because I guess they're third years at this point. He's like, what are you going to do after high school? Are you going to go to college? Are you going to get a job? What are you going to do? And Tatsumi doesn't know. And so the whole time that Awara is kind of like Echizen, giving Wakasa this ultimatum of, is Tatsumi going to let you stay with him forever or not? While that's all going on, Tatsumi's questioning what he's going to do with his life. And so there is a bit of tension there where you're like, I don't know what's going to happen. And if we're actually going to get, if we're going to actually see them split up, that's like the big tension. Are they going to split up by the end of this? And so following these chapters of existential crisis, Wakasa goes missing. And Echizen tries to convince Tatsumi that he finally decided to stay back in the ocean. He's like, oh, well, he was really sad. He missed Awara. He decided to stay back. He's leaving you finally, so you can let go and move on with your life and decide what you want to do after high school. But Tatsumi says no. He's like, Wakasa would not just leave me. He makes the hilarious excuse saying Wakasa would have wanted a going away party and would say goodbye. But he's like, no, Wakasa wouldn't have just left me. And he forms a search party to look for Wakasa. And Echizen finally gives him a clue when he realizes how much Tatsumi cares about Wakasa. He's like, well, maybe if you look over there. And then we come to find out, Wakasa had been talking with Awara and ends up on the shoreline like he did in Volume 1. And there's this beautiful moment where Tatsumi looks down at him and is like, he's so glad to see Wakasa. And he's like, let's go home. It's like, and he like picks him back up just like he did in Volume 1 and takes him home. He doesn't let him go. He's like, no, we're together. We're not going anywhere. And it's like, not a romance, but Tatsumi takes his aptitude test to figure out what he wants to do after high school. And the other sea creatures kind of weigh in of what they would do if they were human. Takase would have been a mechanic. Wakasa would have been an idol singing because he's a siren. Mikuni wants to be the rainbow. And we find out in one of the Q&As that jellyfish don't have a gender, so they're kind of non-binary. So Mikuni wanted to be a rainbow, but then eventually decides he wanted to be an idol like Wakasa. Goromaru wants to be Kasumi's husband. Makara says that they want to be a bride. Doesn't say they want to be Tatsumi's bride, but they want to be a bride. And Goromaru chimes in saying, oh, well, then we'll be relatives together. So I wonder if that was like a subtle way of saying Goromaru and Makara could end up together. That would be really cute. Agari does this weird pose and the mangaka's like, you figure out what they want to be. And it's really funny. And then Maki wants to live in a clamshell because it's huge. And by the end of the series, Tatsumi realizes that it doesn't matter what he ends up choosing as his final career, as long as he can be with Wakasa and the others. The end. So I just did like an hour-long dive into this manga, but it was really not what I expected at all. It was super sweet. It was wholesome. It was funny. It was not a romance. Definitely a comedy series, but there were, as you can see, lots of elements that lend itself that it could be a BL. It could be. It's like one step away. But I would honestly say I thought I was going to go into this anime and this manga thinking it was going to be like Sex Pistols and be bonkers and ridiculous and outrageous and scandalous. It's not. It's really cute and adorable. And I would say if you're not a BL person necessarily, but you just want like a really cute series, this is one for you. If you do like BL, but you want something that's very wholesome and like sugar sweet, this is for you. I really was surprised by how tame this series was and how much I ended up enjoying it. So I would have liked a little more spice, but honestly, I went to AO3 after I finished this and they make up for it on there. Everybody had the same idea because on AO3 they're like, we're going to make this a BL. It's really cute. But if you just want like a really cute series that's fun and kind of out there, this definitely would fit the bill. And I think that you could be really, literally any age and be fine reading this series. I think it's like a rated G. It's definitely a G-rated series. I was expecting something like X-rated, and I got the polar opposite, but that's not in a bad way. So, I hope y'all enjoyed this review. Don't worry, if you were expecting something spicy and ridiculous, I have a feeling that next week's entry, our final JanuYaoi entry, might do the trick. It's one I've been recommended since I started this channel. I'm just now getting around to it. I've heard it's ridiculous, but it's one that I feel I need to see. So, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care. But yeah, I'll see you all next week with our final installment of JanuYaoi.